Quaint and go a story from the Brazilian Sertão. Welcome, dear listeners, to a journey through the arid and passionate heart of imperial Brazil. Today, I invite you to discover a story that blooms like mandacaru in the dry earth, the saga of Francisca, a widow from the Sertão who discovered that love can be born even from the ashes of pain. A narrative where each drop of rain carries hope, each silent glance whispers unspoken truths, and each simple gesture builds bridges between broken hearts. In the year 1889, when Brazil walked toward great transformations, in the small Arraial da Serra, a woman learned that sometimes we need to embrace the unexpected to discover who we truly are. But before we begin this journey, tell me, where are you joining us from? Leave your city in the comments. I want to know from what corner of our Brazil you came to hear this story. And if you're already feeling your heart warm with this introduction, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like. It helps me continue bringing these stories that touch the soul. Arraial da Serra, Sertão of Bahia, Year of Our Lord, 1889. The September sun bit the earth like red-hot iron when Francisca heard the dull sound of a body falling against her door. It was a sound she knew well, the sound of someone who had reached the limit of their strength, like a wounded bird seeking shade before wings give up carrying the weight of life. She raised her eyes from the fabric she was sewing, a raw cotton shirt that would be sold at the next new moon's fair. Her fingers, thin but calloused from work, rested on her chest in a gesture that had become automatic whenever the unexpected knocked at her door. Her heart raced like a startled horse, but Francisca breathed deeply. At 22 years old, she had already learned that life in the Sertão didn't ask permission to arrive. It simply arrived, like rain or drought, like joy or misfortune. The boy, Pedro, who was playing in the yard with little clay figures, ran toward his aunt, his brown eyes wide with curiosity and fear. Francisca placed her hand on the frail shoulder of her nephew, feeling under her palm the accelerated pulse of the 6-year-old boy who had lost his mother at birth and found in her a second chance at affection. "Stay here, my dear," she whispered, her voice soft as ginned cotton. "Let Auntie see what it is." She opened the door carefully, like someone unrolling a secret. And there he was, a tall man with broad shoulders curved by exhaustion, black hair stuck with sweat to his forehead, clothes covered with the red dust of roads. He was conscious, but his eyes dark as a moonless night, seemed to carry a weight that went far beyond physical exhaustion. Francisca knew that type of look. It was the same one she saw in the mirror, since Joaquin had left never to return 3 years ago. It was the look of someone who carries inside their chest an emptiness that echoes with each heartbeat. "Do you need help, sir?" she asked, maintaining the respectful distance that a widowed woman should keep from unknown men. The stranger tried to straighten up, leaning against the doorframe. There was a broken dignity in his movements, like a cracked vase that still tries to fulfill its function of holding flowers. "Forgive the disturbance, senora." His voice was hoarse but educated. "I walked far and—" He hesitated, as if the words were too heavy for his parched lips. "Could you give me some water?" Francisca studied the man's face. There was no evil there, only a deep sadness that seemed to have taken root in his soul. Something in her chest was moved, a tuned string that vibrated when recognizing pain similar to her own. "Come in," she said finally, stepping aside to make way. "But only while you drink the water and eat something. Then you'll have to leave." The man nodded as if he already expected this condition. He entered slowly, respectfully, removing his leather hat and revealing disheveled hair that begged for the care of a feminine hand. Francisca served fresh water from the clay pitcher, watching how he drank with the thirst of someone who had walked leagues under the merciless sun. "What is your name?" she asked, filling a plate with beans, cassava flour, and a piece of dried meat. "Sebastião Ferreira," he replied, and there was something solemn in the way he pronounced his own name, like a formal introduction in an encounter that would change destinies. "I own the Boa Esperança Ranch, 2 leagues from here." Francisca frowned. She knew the ranch by name, but had never seen the owner. It was said that he was a solitary man, who rarely came down to the settlement. "Boa Esperança is to the north. What are you doing here to the south, so far from home?" Sebastião chewed slowly, as if savoring not only the food, but the moment of peace that humble home offered. His eyes roamed the simple room, the well-kept adobe walls, the simple but clean furniture, the dried flowers in clay vases, the sewing abandoned on the table. It was a house where care was breathed, where each object had a place and each place told a story of someone who, even alone, had not given up making life something beautiful. Sometimes a man needs to walk aimlessly to find what he seeks, he replied, and his eyes met hers for an instant that seemed to last an eternity. Francisca felt a shiver that didn't come from the wind. There was something in that look that made her remember distant storms, those moments when the air becomes dense and the soul senses that something important is about to happen. "Eat and go," she said, more to herself than to him, repeating the words that had become her mantra, whenever loneliness threatened to open its floodgates. Sebastião finished the meal in silence, but before getting up, he extended a silver coin toward Francisca. "You don't need to," she said, pulling back her hand. "Yes, you do," he insisted, leaving the coin on the table. "A woman should not give without receiving anything in return. That diminishes her dignity." His words touched something deep in Francisca's chest. It had been a long time since someone had spoken to her about dignity, about the value she herself had forgotten to recognize in herself. Sebastião walked to the door, put on his hat, and turned one last time. Pedro peeked from behind his aunt's skirt, curious about that strange man who spoke differently from the others they knew. "I will return," said Sebastião, and it wasn't a question, nor a request. It was a promise that came from his lips like someone announcing the inevitable arrival of the next season. Francisca stood at the door until she saw him disappear around the bend in the road, swallowed by the golden dust of late afternoon. Only then did she realize that her heart beat differently, as if someone had touched the strings of an instrument, silent for a long time. What kind of man was that, who arrived like a storm and left, leaving the air charged with possibilities? 2 weeks passed like pages turned by the wind. Francisca tried to forget the strange visitor, but discovered that certain people leave marks on the soul like footprints in wet sand. The more we try to erase, the deeper they become. It was Thursday evening when she decided to go to the Valley of Stones to fetch water from the stream that still resisted the drought. Pedro accompanied her, jumping between the stones like a young goat, oblivious to the concerns that clouded his aunt's thoughts. The valley was a place of wild and melancholy beauty. The large stones, washed by generations of rains, formed natural pools where the scarce water accumulated like tears of the earth. It was there that Francisca went when she needed to think, when the solitude of the house became too great to fit in her chest. It was Pedro who saw him first. "Aunt Chica, there's someone fallen over there." Francisca's heart raced before her eyes even confirmed what she already knew. It was him. Sebastião lay near the edge of the stream, conscious but visibly weakened, as if he had walked for days without rest. She ran, forgetting prudence, forgetting the care that a single woman should have. She knelt beside him, feeling the heat radiating from his body like fever from cracked earth. "What happened?" she asked, touching his forehead with the back of her hand. Sebastião opened his eyes and looked at her with an intensity that made her tremble. There was something different in that look, something that hadn't been there the first time, a more specific, more personal pain. "Francisca," he murmured, and the fact that he knew her name made her stop breathing for an instant. "How do you know my name?" He tried to sit up, leaning on his elbows. His clothes were dirty with earth and dry leaves, as if he had slept in the open. "I asked in the settlement," he confessed without looking away. "I wanted to know who was the woman who took me in." Francisca felt her cheeks burn. It was disconcerting to know she had been a topic of conversation, that this mysterious man had been interested enough in her to ask questions. "Do you need help getting home?" she offered, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm not going home," he said, and there was a strange determination in his voice. "Not yet." "Why?" Sebastião remained silent for a long moment, watching the water that flowed gently between the stones. When he spoke again, his words fell like stones into water, creating waves that spread through Francisca's heart. "I knew your husband, Francisca." The world stopped. The sound of water, the song of birds, Pedro's breathing. Everything was suspended in the air like golden dust at the end of the afternoon. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Joaquin never mentioned knowing anyone from the Boa Esperanza ranch." "He knew me," insisted Sebastião, and now there was urgency in his voice. "But not as you knew him. There were things about his life that he never told you." Francisca felt the ground move under her feet. Joaquin had been a man of few words, it's true, but she thought she knew every corner of his soul, every scar of his story. "What kind of things?" she asked, although part of her feared the answer. Sebastião tried to get up, but wavered. Francisca instinctively extended her arm to help him, and for a moment they were very close, close enough for her to smell earth and sweat on his skin, close enough to see that there were unshed tears in his eyes. "I can't talk here," he said, looking at Pedro, who was watching everything with curiosity. "Not like this." "Then when? When you're ready to hear truths you might not want to know." His words floated in the air like smoke, charged with promises and threats. Francisca felt she was at the edge of a precipice, and that the next step would define whether she would fly or fall. Sebastião began to move away, but his steps were unsteady. Suddenly he stopped, put his hand to his head, and collapsed on his knees. Francisca didn't think. She ran to him, supported his weight with her small but strong arms, felt the exact moment when he fainted, and became completely dependent on her strength. "Pedro!" she called to the boy. "Run home and get the blanket from my room, quick!" While waiting for her nephew to return, Francisca remained there, holding in her arms a man who had arrived in her life like an announced storm. She observed his sleeping face, the lines of fatigue engraved on his skin, the unshaven beard that gave him a wild and vulnerable air at the same time. "What secrets do you carry about my Joaquin?" she asked silently to the unconscious man in her arms. "And why does my heart beat like this when I'm near you?" Sebastião spent 3 days between consciousness and delirium, alternating moments of lucidity with periods when he murmured words that Francisca couldn't decipher. She had accommodated him in the room that had once been Joaquin's, the only bedroom in the house besides the living room, and the small room where she slept with Pedro. It was strange to have a man there again. The room had remained untouched since her husband's death, like a sanctuary for memories she couldn't bury. Now, with Sebastião occupying the bed, breathing between those walls, the space seemed to awaken from a long sleep. On the morning of the 4th day, she entered with a bowl of chicken broth and found Sebastião sitting on the edge of the bed, looking through the small window at the yard where Pedro played. "How do you feel?" she asked, maintaining a safe distance. "Better," he replied, accepting the bowl with hands that trembled slightly. "Thank you for taking me in. I know it wasn't easy for you." Francisca noticed that he looked around the room with attention, as if recognizing something there. His eyes rested on the dresser where some of Joaquin's belongings still were, the bone comb, the razor, the small saint's image he always carried in his pocket. "This was his room," she said, more a statement than a question. It was. The simple confirmation without explanations irritated Francisca. How could he be so certain? "You need to return to your ranch," she said, trying to sound firm. "I can't take care of a stranger indefinitely." Sebastião finished the broth in silence, then got up slowly, testing the firmness of his legs. He was a tall man, Francisca noted again, with broad shoulders that filled the small room with his masculine presence. "You're right," he agreed. "But let me repay your kindness before I leave." In the following days, a peculiar routine was established between them. Sebastião insisted on helping with house chores while he fully recovered his strength. He fixed the yard fence that had been fallen for months, adjusted the loose tiles that let rain in, and even lent a hand in the small garden that Francisca maintained with difficulty. It was disconcerting to have him there. Francisca had gotten used to solitude, had created a life that functioned only with her and Pedro. Sebastião's presence disturbed her certainties, brought back sensations she had buried along with Joaquin. What disturbed her most was the ease with which he fit into her routines. He got up early before her, and was already working when she went out to fetch water. He helped Pedro make clay figures, teaching the boy to carve small wooden figures with infinite patience. "Where did you learn that?" asked Francisca one afternoon, watching Sebastião's skilled hands shape a small wooden horse. "My father taught me," he replied, without taking his eyes off the work. "He said a man needs to know how to create beauty with his hands, not just destroy." There was a melancholy in his voice that made Francisca wonder what kind of man his father had been, what kind of childhood this silent man had had, who now occupied her home as if he had always belonged there. One night she found him sitting on the doorstep, watching the stars. The moon was full, bathing the yard with silvery light that transformed everything into poetry. "Can't you sleep?" she asked, sitting at a respectful distance. "I sleep little," he confessed, "for a long time now." "Because of the ranch?" Sebastião laughed, but it was a sound without joy. "The ranch goes well by itself. It's the soul that doesn't find peace." Francisca knew that feeling well. Since Joaquin died, sleep came late and left early, like an ill-mannered guest who doesn't feel welcome. "Why did you come here, Sebastião?" she asked, and this time her voice carried more curiosity than distrust. "Why did you specifically seek my house?" He remained silent for so long that she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his words came loaded with a weight she couldn't interpret. "Because I promised I would come." "Promise to whom?" Sebastian turned to look at her, and in the moonlight Francisca saw something in his eyes that made her heart race. It was affection, but also pain. It was desire, but also guilt. "To your husband, Francisca. I promised Joaquin that I would take care of you." Her world collapsed again, like a house of cards touched by the wind. All the questions she had swallowed in recent days rose to her throat at once. How so? When? Where did you meet? "It's a long story," he said, getting up, "and painful. Are you sure you want to hear it?" Francisca also got up, feeling she was at the threshold of a discovery that would change everything she believed she knew about her own life. "I want to know everything." But at that moment, Pedro woke up crying from a nightmare, and the conversation had to wait. While Francisca calmed her nephew, Sebastião disappeared into his room, leaving her with more questions than answers, and the certainty that the coming days would bring revelations she might not be prepared to face. How had Joaquin known this man, and what kind of promise was it that had brought Sebastião to her door? The rain came at dawn like a gift from heaven to the thirsty earth. Francisca woke to the sound of the first drops drumming on the roof, music she hadn't heard for months. She ran to the window and saw the black clouds accumulating like promises of relief for the drought that punished the region. But what began as blessing soon transformed into fury. The wind howled through the cracks of the house, making the walls tremble. The rain from gentle became torrential, as if the sky wanted to pour out all at once all the water it had stored during the dry months. Francisca hugged Pedro, who had woken, frightened by the thunder. From the next room, she could hear Sebastião moving, probably also awakened by the storm. The first crash made the house shake. Francisca felt her heart race when she realized that part of the roof was giving way. The old wood, dried by the relentless sun, wasn't prepared for the weight of the accumulating water. "Francisca!" Sebastião's voice came from the room, loaded with urgency. She ran there with Pedro in her arms and found water running down the walls. One of the roof beams had cracked and rain was entering like a furious waterfall. "The house is going to collapse," said Sebastião, quickly putting on his shirt. "We need to get out of here." But where would they go in the middle of that storm? The nearest house was kilometers away, and Pedro was too small to face the icy rain and cutting wind. That's when it happened. Lightning illuminated the sky like diabolical fireworks, followed by thunder so strong it made the ground tremble. The main beam of the cracked roof began to give way slowly, threatening to collapse on them. Sebastião didn't hesitate. He pushed Francisca and Pedro away at the exact moment the wood collapsed, protecting them with his own body. They fell together on the living room floor, Sebastião on top of Francisca, protecting her from the debris raining around. For a moment that seemed eternal, they remained like that, breaths intertwined, bodies too close for any protocol of decency. Francisca could feel Sebastião's heart beating against her chest, could see in his eyes an intensity that went far beyond fear of the storm. "Are you hurt?" he asked, without moving away. Francisca shook her head, unable to speak. His proximity awakened sensations she had buried 3 years ago. For the first time since Joaquin's death, she felt like a woman again, not just a widow. Sebastião helped her up, his hands remaining on her arms longer than necessary. Pedro was crying, frightened, and that's what broke the dangerous enchantment that had formed between them. "The garden," groaned Francisca, looking through the cracked window. All the work lost. The small plantation that was her source of income and sustenance was being destroyed by the torrent. Months of care, the seedlings she had protected from the relentless sun, everything being carried away by water that now showed itself as destructive as it had been beneficial in other times. "We'll rebuild," said Sebastião, and there was a determination in his voice that surprised her. "I'll help you rebuild everything." "Why?" she asked, turning to look at him. "Why do you care so much about a stranger?" Sebastião looked at her with an expression that mixed affection and anguish. "You're not a stranger, Francisca. You never were." Before she could ask what that meant, the storm roared again, and they had to take shelter in the safest corner of the house, waiting for heaven's fury to subside. They spent the whole night there, the three of them together, listening to the rain beat against the house's wounded walls. Pedro eventually fell asleep in Francisca's lap, and she had time to observe Sebastião in the dim light of the oil lamp. He had risked his own life to protect her. These were no longer the gestures of a stranger fulfilling some promise. There was something personal there, something that made her tremble more than the rain's cold. When dawn finally broke and the storm moved away, leaving behind only the gentle dripping from rooftops, Francisca went out to see the damage. The garden was devastated, the fence knocked down, part of the roof destroyed. But when she looked at Sebastião, who was already examining the damage and making reconstruction plans, she realized something she didn't expect. For the first time in 3 years, she smiled for real. A smile that was born not from sadness or resignation, but from something resembling hope. "We're going to rebuild everything," she said, surprising herself with her own determination. "Together." And when Sebastião smiled back, Francisca knew that the storm had destroyed more than her house and garden. It had also destroyed the walls she had built around her heart, leaving her exposed and vulnerable to feelings she had sworn never to allow again. Was she ready for that? The reconstruction began with sunrise. Sebastião worked like a man possessed, pulling out debris, separating wood that could still be used, organizing materials as if the task were personally his. Francisca watched, impressed by his dedication. It was on the 3rd day of work when it happened. Francisca was collecting belongings that had scattered around the room during the storm when her fingers touched something strange in Sebastião's travel bag, which had fallen and spilled part of its contents on the floor. It was a brown leather notebook, tied with a cord, a notebook she knew all too well. Her hands trembled when she recognized it. It was Joaquin's personal notebook, where he wrote thoughts, house accounts, small reflections about life. She had searched for this notebook for weeks after her husband's death, never finding it. She had believed it was lost in the confusion of the last days. But there it was, in the luggage of a stranger who claimed to have known him. "What are you doing with this?" she asked, standing up with the notebook in her hands. Sebastião, who was fixing a nearby beam, stopped working and looked at her. When he saw what she held, his face paled. "Francisca, answer me!" Her voice came out louder than intended, charged with anger that had been growing for days. "How do you have my husband's notebook? Did you steal it from his belongings?" Sebastião dropped the hammer and walked toward her, but Francisca stepped back, hugging the notebook against her chest as if she were protecting Joaquin again. "I didn't steal it," he said, his voice calm but laden with sadness. "Joaquin gave it to me." "That's a lie. Joaquin would never give this to a stranger." "I wasn't a stranger to him, Francisca." She opened the notebook with trembling fingers, searching for the familiar handwriting of her husband. And there it was. On the first page she opened, a note that made her world stop. "If something happens to me, Sebastião will know what to do. I trust him like a brother. May God bless him for accepting to care for my family." The note was dated 2 weeks before Joaquin's death. How is this possible?" she whispered. Sebastião sat in the nearby chair, like a man carrying an immense weight on his shoulders. "Joaquin sought me out 3 days before he died, Francisca. He was sick, knew he didn't have much time. He brought this notebook and asked me one thing." "What thing?" "That I take care of you. That I guarantee you would never want for anything. That you would never be completely alone." Francisca leafed through the notebook, finding more notes about Sebastião, references to meetings she never knew had happened, plans her husband had made without ever commenting to her. "Why did you never tell me you knew him?" "Because I didn't want you to worry," replied Sebastião. "Joaquin was involved in complicated business. He had dangerous creditors. He came to ask for my help, because he knew I had resources to protect you if something happened." Francisca's anger transformed into confusion. Joaquin had never mentioned financial problems, never shown fear or concern about collectors. "What kind of business?" Sebastião hesitated, as if carefully weighing his words. "Trade that required discretion. Joaquin transported goods for influential people in the region. It wasn't always completely legal." "Smuggling," said Francisca. "And it wasn't a question." Sebastião nodded gravely. "Weapons mainly, for landowners preparing for the political changes that were coming." Francisca sat heavily on the bed, the notebook still clutched against her chest. Everything she believed she knew about Joaquin, about their life together, about the reasons for his death, was being rewritten before her. "Did he die because of this business?" "His heart couldn't take the pressure," said Sebastião softly. "But yes, the worry, the fear of what could happen to you if creditors came after him, all of that contributed." Francisca closed her eyes, feeling tears burn behind her eyelids. Joaquin had died carrying secrets, protecting her from a truth he judged too dangerous for her to know. "Where were you when he died?" she asked, opening her eyes to look at Sebastião. "With him," replied Sebastião, and his voice broke a little. "I held his hand when he left. It was his last words that brought me to you." The revelation fell on Francisca like a second storm. The man she had welcomed into her house, who slept in Joaquin's room, who now helped her rebuild her life, had been present at the most important and painful moment of her existence. What did he say? Sebastião got up and walked to the window, as if he couldn't look at her to repeat the words. He said you were the best thing that had ever happened in his life, that I should take care of you as he would have liked to, and that, if someday you could be happy again, he would rest in peace. Francisca hugged the notebook tighter and cried. She cried for unspoken words, for secrets kept, for Joaquin's loneliness in his last days of life. She also cried for the confusion she felt now, divided between gratitude and anger, between longing for her husband and the inexplicable attraction she felt for this man who had been his last companion. "Why did you take so long to tell me this?" she asked through sobs. Sebastião turned back to her, and Francisca saw tears in his eyes too. "Because I knew it would change everything between us, and because—" he hesitated. "Because I fell in love with you, Francisca, and I didn't want you to think I was here just because of a promise." The confession floated in the air like incense, perfuming the environment with a truth that both had felt, but neither had dared to pronounce. Francisca looked at the notebook, at Sebastião, at the house they were rebuilding together, and knew she had reached a point of no return. She would have to decide if the past would define her forever, or if she was willing to write a new chapter in her story. But for now she could only hug the notebook tighter and whisper, "I need time to think," and Sebastião, understanding, just nodded and returned to work, leaving her alone with the ghosts of the past and the possibilities of the future. Francisca spent the night awake, leafing through Joaquin's notebook page by page. The full moon entered through the repaired window, illuminating the familiar handwriting that now revealed secrets he had taken to the grave. "Sebastião is a good man. If I don't manage to resolve this situation, he will take better care of Francisca than I ever could. Colonel Batista's men are getting impatient. I need to deliver the shipment soon, or there will be problems." I dreamed that Francisca was happy again. I woke up crying. "If God takes me, may that be his will." Each note was like a stab to her heart. Joaquin had lived his last months in a personal hell, protecting her from a reality he considered too dangerous to share. At dawn, she found Sebastião already working in the yard, fixing the fence the storm had knocked down. He looked up when she approached, but said nothing, waiting for her to take the initiative. "I read the whole notebook," she said, sitting on a nearby log. "I imagine it was difficult. Joaquin wrote about you. A lot about you." Francisca paused, watching Sebastião's calloused hands work the wood. "He wrote about meetings you had, conversations about me, about Pedro, about the future." Sebastião stopped working and looked at her. "He worried a lot about you." There was more than worry there, Sebastião. Her voice had a new firmness, forged by the night of revelations. There was fear, real fear. What exactly was Joaquin afraid of? Sebastião sighed deeply, like a man who knew the time had come to completely open the chest of secrets he carried. "Sit down," he said, pointing to the shade of a tree. "It's a long story, and painful." Francisca obeyed, mentally preparing for what was to come. "I met your husband 5 years ago, long before he married you," began Sebastião. "He appeared at my ranch one night, wounded, pursued by armed men." "Wounded how?" "Shot in the shoulder. He said he had gotten involved in a business that went wrong, that he needed to hide until things calmed down." Sebastião picked up a twig and began carving it nervously. "I hid him for 2 weeks. During that time we talked a lot. He was a good man, Francisca. Complicated but good. Why was he being pursued?" Joaquin worked as an intermediary between smugglers and buyers, weapons mainly, but sometimes other types of merchandise. He didn't do it out of malice, but because they paid well and he dreamed of having a family, a stable life. Francisca processed the information slowly. The gentle and hard-working man she had married had been a smuggler. It was like discovering she had been married to a stranger. "But he stopped when he met you," continued Sebastião. "At least he tried to stop. The problem is that in that type of business, it's not easy to simply get out." "What do you mean?" Sebastião hesitated, as if the next words were particularly heavy. "Joaquin owed money to dangerous people. He couldn't make the last delivery because the merchandise was seized by soldiers. The creditors didn't accept that as an excuse." Francisca felt a chill in her stomach. "What kind of people?" "Colonel Batista's henchmen. Men who don't hesitate to hurt families to get what they want." The fear Francisca saw in Joaquin's writings began to make sense. He wasn't just worried about sustenance or illnesses. He was fighting against real, tangible enemies. "Was that why he came back to look for you?" "Yes, 3 months before he died. He was desperate, said that the colonel's men had come to your house, asked questions about him. He was afraid they would hurt you or Pedro. Francisca vaguely remembered strange men who had appeared at their property some months before Joaquin's death. He had said they were lost merchants, looking for information about the road. Now she understood why he had been tense for days after that visit. What did you do to help him? I offered money to pay the debt, but Joaquin refused, said it wasn't my problem. Sebastião stopped carving and looked directly at her. That's when I made the first promise to him. What promise? That if something happened to him, I would guarantee that you and Pedro would be safe, that I would pay his debts and make sure creditors never bothered you again. And the second promise? Sebastião looked away, and Francisca realized they had reached the most delicate part of the story. The second promise was made 3 days before he died. He appeared at the ranch at dawn, very sick, with high fever. He said he felt he didn't have much time. And what did he ask? He asked me not to let you grow old alone, that if someday you could accept me, I would offer you a chance to be happy again. The words fell between them like seeds in fertile ground. Francisca finally understood why Sebastião had appeared in her life, why he seemed to know her so well, why his looks carried a familiarity that went beyond mere attraction. Joaquin introduced us before we even met, she whispered. In a way, yes. Francisca remained silent for a long time, processing everything she had heard. It was a lot to absorb. Joaquin's secrets, the dangers he had faced, the promises he had extracted from Sebastião. Is there anything else you haven't told me? She asked finally. Sebastião hesitated again, and Francisca knew that yes, there was more. What is it? There's a letter, he said finally. A letter that Joaquin wrote to you before he died. He asked me to only deliver it when I thought you were ready to read it. Francisca's heart accelerated. Where is it? With me. It always has been. I want to read it. Now. Sebastião got up slowly. Are you sure? Some truths are heavier than others, Francisca. Once you read it, you can't unread it. Francisca also got up, feeling a determination grow within her like a flame fed by wind. I've carried too many doubts for too long. Bring the letter. While watching Sebastião enter the house to fetch the last piece of the puzzle that had been her life with Joaquin, Francisca realized she was about to discover not only who her husband had really been, but also who she herself could become. The truth was finally within her reach. It remained to see if she would have enough courage to face it. The letter was yellowed by time and careful handling, folded and refolded like a treasure map kept for years. Sebastião handed it to Francisca with the solemnity of someone delivering a sacred relic. Read it alone first, he said. Then if you want to talk about the content, I'll be here. Francisca held the letter against her chest for a moment, feeling she was about to hear Joaquin's voice for the last time. Her hands trembled when she broke the already cracked wax seal. The familiar handwriting greeted her like an embrace. My dear Francisca, if you are reading this letter, it's because Sebastião kept his word and waited for the right moment to deliver it. I hope enough time has passed for your pain to have transformed into longing, and your longing into the possibility of new joy. I ask forgiveness for not having been the husband you deserved, not for the love that I gave completely, but for honesty. I carried secrets that I thought would protect you, but now I realize they only distanced me from the woman I love. You need to know the truth about my life before you, about the mistakes I made and the consequences that may still reach us. Before meeting you, I was a lost man involved in business that would shame any decent wife. I smuggled weapons for landowners preparing for the changes coming to the country. It was easy money, and I needed it to build the life I dreamed of having someday. When I met you at the San Juan festival in Aroeiras, I knew I had found the reason to change. You were so beautiful in that blue skirt, laughing with the other girls, that I decided right then that you would be my wife, and I would be a man worthy of you. I tried to leave smuggling, but things aren't that simple. I owe money to dangerous men, 5 conto de reis that I couldn't gather after a shipment was seized by soldiers. Colonel Batista has already sent his henchmen to look for me twice. The first time, I managed to convince them I would pay soon. The second time, they threatened to hurt you if I didn't settle the debt. That's when I sought out Sebastião Ferreira. I met him years ago, when I took refuge at his ranch fleeing from other problems. He's a good man, Francisca. Honest in a way I never managed to be. He offered to pay my debt, but I can't accept. I've already embarrassed him enough with my problems. Sebastião made me a promise, and I made him 2 requests. The first is that he take care of you and Pedro if something happens to me. The second is harder to write. Francisca, you are only 22 years old. You are young, beautiful, intelligent. You have much love to give and much love to receive. If God takes me, I don't want you to spend the rest of your life dressed in mourning, caring only for the memory of a man who loved you but failed to protect you adequately. Sebastião is a widower for 4 years. He lost his wife in a difficult birth, and since then has shut himself in his ranch like a hermit. But I saw how he speaks of you when I mention your name. I saw the light that appears in his eyes when I describe your goodness, your strength, your beauty. He loves you, Francisca, even without having gotten to know you properly yet, and I strangely am happy about that. Sebastião can give you the life I always wanted to give, but never could. He has resources to protect you, honesty to respect you, and a heart big enough to love Pedro as a son. I know it's a lot to ask. I know it may seem disrespectful of me to suggest my replacement even before leaving, but the truth is I prefer to imagine you happy in the arms of a good man than alone crying for someone who brought more problems than solutions to your life. There's one last thing, and I hope Sebastião helps you with this. I hide 5 pounds of gold in the yard, buried under the big mango tree, 3 spans from the route facing east. It's clean money, saved before the difficult times. Use it to ensure you and Pedro never want for anything. I don't know how much more time I'll have. My heart is weak and worry doesn't help. If I manage to overcome this crisis, I promise I'll be a better husband. If not, know that I leave in peace, knowing you'll have the opportunity to be happy. You were the best thing that happened to me in this life, Francisca. The love you gave me made me a better man, even if not as good as I should have been. If you ever decide to accept Sebastião as a companion, know that you have my blessing. He will know how to love you as I would have liked to know how. With all my love and my regret, Joaquin P.S. At the bottom of the chest, under the embroidered sheets of your trousseau, there are 2 more letters. One for Pedro, which he should read when he turns 15. Another for Sebastião in case he accepts to care for you. I trust him to decide when it's time to deliver them. Francisca read the letter 3 times before being able to fully process its content. Tears ran down her face, but they weren't just tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of understanding, of a strange gratitude. Joaquin hadn't died hiding secrets out of lack of love. He had died trying to protect her, and even in death continued trying to guarantee her happiness. When she finally left the house looking for Sebastião, she found him sitting under the mango tree, exactly where Joaquin had hidden the gold. He looked up when she approached and didn't need to ask anything. Her expression said it all. "He knew," said Francisca, sitting beside him. "Joaquin knew you would fall in love with me before you even got to know me well." Joaquin was an intelligent man, despite the mistakes he made. "Did you read his letter to you?" Sebastião nodded. "Several times. It's what gave me courage to come look for you, even knowing I could be rejected." Francisca looked at her hands, then at the house they were rebuilding together, then at Pedro playing in the yard, oblivious to the revolutions happening in the adults' world. "Sebastião? Yes? Is the gold still here?" He smiled, and it was the first truly happy smile she had seen on his lips. "I dug this morning. After you mentioned the letter, I found not just 5 pounds, but 8. Joaquin was a better manager than he admitted. Francisca laughed, a sound that hadn't come from her throat for so long, she almost didn't recognize it as her own. "So we're not as poor as we thought." "No, we're not." They remained silent for a moment, absorbing the weight and freedom that truth had brought. Then Francisca asked the question that hung between them. "What do we do now, Sebastião?" He turned to look at her completely. "That depends on you, Francisca. I know what my heart wants. I know what Joaquin expected, but I want to know what you want." Francisca looked into his eyes she had learned to read, that no longer hid secrets, that looked at her with patient and true love. "I want to try," she said finally. "I want to see if we can build something good on the foundation Joaquin left for us." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure I want to try to be sure." Sebastião laughed at the confused answer, and Francisca also laughed, and suddenly they were laughing together like 2 people who had finally found a reason to believe the future could be better than the past. When the laughter subsided, Sebastião extended his hand to her. "Then let's try together." Francisca looked at the extended hand, thought of Joaquin, of Pedro, of herself, and finally intertwined her fingers with Sebastião's. It was just the beginning, but it was a true beginning. The following days were like learning to walk again. Francisca felt divided between growing familiarity with Sebastião and the feeling of betraying some invisible code of widowhood she had carried like a heavy cloak for the last 3 years. Sebastião, for his part, moved among them with the delicacy of someone handling antique crystal. Each gesture, Each word, each look was measured, respectful, charged with the patience of someone who knew that true love is not in a hurry. It was Pedro who first broke the invisible barriers that had risen between them. One afternoon, while Sebastian was fixing the last piece of fence, the boy approached with his clay figures. "Uncle Bastien," he said, and the title came naturally without hesitation. "Are you going to stay with us forever?" Sebastian stopped working and knelt at the boy's eye level. "Would you like me to stay?" Pedro nodded vigorously. "Aunt Chica gets less sad when you're here, and you know how to make wooden horses." Sebastian looked at Francisca, who was watching the conversation from the kitchen window. There was a question in his eyes, a question that went far beyond a child's simple words. "If your aunt lets me," said Sebastian to the boy, "I would very much like to stay." That night, after Pedro fell asleep, Francisca and Sebastian sat on the doorstep, as they had done several times in recent days. It was the moment when they talked, when silences said as much as words. "I need to see the ranch," said Francisca suddenly. "My ranch. Your ranch. Boa Esperanza. If we're going to try something, I need to know where you live, how you live." Sebastião considered the request for a moment. "It's a long walk for a woman and child. Then we'll go slowly." The next day, they set out at dawn. Francisca had prepared water and food for the journey, and Pedro bounced with excitement about the adventure. It was the first time he would leave the settlement's surroundings. The Boa Esperanza ranch lay beyond the rocky hills, in a green valley that seemed like an oasis in the middle of the arid landscape. Even with the drought, there was running water and some cultivated areas that resisted the harsh climate. The house was larger than Francisca expected, not a mansion, but a solid construction of stone and wood, with a wide veranda and large windows that let in light and ventilation. It was a house made to shelter a family, but that breathed loneliness through every pore. "It's beautiful," said Francisca, and there was sincerity in her voice. "It's empty," replied Sebastião. "For 4 years it's been just me, 2 employees, and silence." Pedro ran to explore the extensive yard, enchanted with the space and freedom. Francisca walked through the house, observing each room, each detail. There was good taste in the choices, but also a palpable sadness, as if the house had lost its soul along with its previous owner. In the main room, she stopped before a portrait on the dresser, a young and beautiful woman, with light hair and a sweet smile. "Isabel," said Sebastião behind her, "my first wife. She was very beautiful." She was, and she was good. She died trying to give birth to our first child. They both died. Francisca turned to look at him, seeing the old pain engraved on his features. "That's why you understand my pain," she said, "because you know your own. Maybe that's why Joaquin thought we could understand each other. 2 people who lost much but still have the capacity to love." They walked through the rooms in silence, each imagining what it would be like to live there. Francisca visualized Pedro running through the corridors, visualized herself cooking in that spacious kitchen, visualized sewing afternoons on the veranda with a view of the hills. But she also wondered if she could be happy in a house haunted by another woman, if she could love a man who still kept the first wife's portrait in a place of honor. As if reading her thoughts, Sebastião stopped in front of the portrait again. "If you come to live here," he said carefully, "Isabel will continue to be part of this house. I can't erase what I lived with her, just as you can't erase what you lived with Joaquin. But that doesn't mean there's no room for a new love." Francisca touched the glass protecting the portrait. Would she approve? "Isabel always wanted me to be happy. I think she would approve of a woman capable of bringing life back to this house." When they returned to the settlement at day's end, Francisca carried more than memories of the ranch. She carried possibilities. For the first time since Sebastião had appeared in her life, she could imagine a concrete, tangible future. That night, after Pedro fell asleep exhausted from the adventure, she made a decision. "Sebastião," she called him as he was putting away work materials. "Yes, I want you to stay. Not just a few days, I want you to stay for real." He stopped what he was doing and looked at her with an intensity that made her blush. "Are you sure?" "I'm not sure about many things, but I'm sure I don't want to live alone anymore. And I'm sure that if I'm going to share my life with someone, I want it to be with you." Sebastião walked toward her slowly, as if fearing she would change her mind before he got close. "It won't be easy, Francisca. Building love on the ruins of other loves is never simple. Nothing in my life has been simple," she replied. "Why would it be different now?" Sebastião extended his hand, and this time, when she intertwined her fingers with his, there was no hesitation. "Then let's build," he said. Slowly, carefully, but let's build. And Francisca knew in that moment that she had found not just a companion, but a partner to rebuild not only the house the storm had torn down, but the life that destiny had shaken. The love being born between them was different from the impetuous passions of youth. It was a mature love, forged in pain, tempered by loss, but therefore more precious. It was a love that knew the value of hope because it had known the weight of sadness. Manuel was the first to notice the change. The old veteran of the Paraguay War, with his shrewd eyes that had seen much of life, watched from his veranda how Sebastião had become a constant presence in Francisca's house. "Good morning, Manet," greeted Francisca one October morning when she went to get eggs from the chickens the neighbor raised. "Good morning, girl." His eyes shone with kindly mischief. "I see you got yourself some company." Francisca blushed but didn't look away. "Sebastião has been helping me with house repairs." "Ah, yes, the repairs." Manuel chuckled softly. "Must be very complicated repairs because he doesn't live here anymore." "Manet, I'm happy for you, girl." The old man's voice became serious, charged with genuine affection. "Joaquin was a good man, but the dead don't warm beds or fill bellies. You're young, beautiful. You deserve to be happy again." Manuel's simple and direct words echoed in Francisca's head all day. Was that what she was doing? Choosing to be happy again? The answer came in the form of small moments that accumulated like raindrops forming a river. Sebastião teaching Pedro to identify different types of wood. Sebastião helping her replant the garden destroyed by the storm. Sebastião humming softly while working, bringing music back to a house that had grown accustomed to silence. It was in the small things that love grew. In the coffee he prepared on mornings when she woke more tired. In the way he fixed her hair when a lock stubbornly escaped her bun. In the care with which he spoke about Joaquin, always with respect, never trying to erase his memory. One afternoon, while sewing on the veranda and watching him fix the last hole in the roof, Francisca realized she hadn't thought of Joaquin all day, not with sadness at least. She had thought of him with affection, with gratitude, but not with the tearing pain that had accompanied her for 3 years. Was it progress or betrayal? "What are you thinking about?" asked Sebastião, coming down from the ladder and sitting beside her. "About how things change," she replied. "About how pain can transform into something else when we're not paying attention." "What kind of something else?" Francisca put her sewing in her lap and looked at him. There was sweat on his forehead, dirt on his hands, satisfaction in his eyes. He was a man working to build something, not just to pass time. "Peace," she said finally. "Pain transformed into peace." Sebastião smiled, and she noticed how that smile had become important to her, how she waited for it during the day, how she felt complete when she received it. And now, what do we do with this peace? Francisca considered the question. What did they do with peace? What did two people who had lost much and found a second chance do with the possibility of being happy? "We live," she said. "We simply live." That night, after Pedro fell asleep, the inevitable happened. Sebastião was in the kitchen washing dinner bowls when Francisca approached from behind. Without words, she placed her hand on his shoulder. He turned slowly, and when their eyes met, both knew they had reached a moment of definition. There were no more doubts, no more hesitation. The kiss, when it finally happened, was soft like summer rain. It didn't have the unbridled passion of youth, but the deep tenderness of two souls that had found refuge in each other. When they separated, Francisca rested her forehead against his. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Of what? Of being happy, of forgetting, of not deserving a second chance." Sebastião held her face in his hands. "Joaquin wanted you to be happy. Isabel would want me to be happy. We're not betraying anyone, Francisca. We're honoring the love we received, using it to create more love." She closed her eyes, letting his words penetrate her heart like seeds in well-prepared soil. "Stay with me tonight," she asked. Not for that. Just stay. I don't want to wake up alone tomorrow." Sebastião nodded, understanding. They lay side by side in the narrow bed, clothed, just warming themselves with each other's presence. Francisca heard his breathing become regular, felt the warmth of his nearby body, and for the first time in 3 years, slept all night without nightmares. When she woke with the sun entering through the window, Sebastião was already up, preparing coffee. Pedro played in the yard as always, and the house breathed a normalcy she had forgotten how good it was. "Good morning," he said, offering her a steaming cup. "Good morning," she replied, and there was a lightness in her voice that hadn't been there the night before. They sat on the veranda to drink coffee, watching Pedro chase chickens in the yard. It was a simple, domestic, common scene. But for Francisca, it was the most extraordinary thing in the world. Normal life, simple life, shared life. Sebastião? Yes? When do you think we should get married? The question came out naturally, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Sebastião almost choked on his coffee. Are you proposing to me, Francisca? She laughed, a sound clear as spring water. I think I am. Or are you going to insist on being traditional and ask for my hand? Sebastião put down his cup and knelt right there, on the veranda, on the wooden boards he had helped repair. Francisca Maria de la Concepción, he said solemnly. Will you marry me? Pedro stopped playing and ran to them, realizing something important was happening. I accept, said Francisca, and sealed the promise with a kiss that Pedro applauded enthusiastically. When they separated, all three were laughing, and Francisca realized she had found something she thought was lost forever. She had found a family. News of the engagement spread through Arraial da Serra like wildfire. In 3 days, the entire small community knew that the widow Francisca had gotten engaged to rancher Sebastião Ferreira. Reactions were varied. The older women shook their heads, murmuring about proper mourning time and social conventions. The men patted Sebastião on the back, approving the choice. Young people saw in the union proof that love could bloom even in already wounded hearts. Francisca tried not to be bothered by whispers and sideways glances. She had decided to be happy and wouldn't let others' opinions cloud that decision. It was Doña Quiteria, the local midwife and healer, who brought the wisest words. Girl, she said, appearing at Francisca's house with a bundle of medicinal herbs, don't pay attention to gossip. Those who criticize never truly loved even once in their lives. Thank you, Doña Quiteria. Besides, continued the old woman with a mischievous gleam in her eyes, it was about time you were getting sour from so much loneliness. Francisca laughed, grateful for the woman's kind frankness. Wedding preparations began immediately. It would be a simple ceremony, as befitted two people who had lived enough to know that happiness was in the details, not in ostentation. Sebastião brought fine fabrics from the big city for Francisca to sew her wedding dress. It wouldn't be white, that would be inappropriate for a second union, but light blue, the color of sky on winter mornings. Pedro was ecstatic about the idea of having a father. He followed Sebastião everywhere, imitating his gestures, learning about ranch work, asking 1,000 questions about horses, cattle, and crops. Is Uncle Bastião really going to be my father? He asked one night, while Francisca helped him dress for bed. If you want, she replied. He won't replace the memory of your real father, but he can be a new father for you. Pedro thought seriously for a moment. Can I have 2 fathers then? One in heaven and one here? The simplicity of the question moved Francisca. Yes, my love, you can have all the fathers who love you. It was Manuel who suggested the wedding be held at the Boa Esperanza ranch. The settlement chapel is too small for the celebration you deserve, he argued, and the ranch has space and natural beauty. It would be perfect. Sebastião agreed immediately, happy with the idea of opening his house to the community for the first time in years. Francisca was touched by the generosity of the gesture. He was offering for her to marry in the space that had been Isabel's, symbolically marking the beginning of a new era. Preparations intensified. Sebastião hired musicians from the neighboring town. The settlement women organized to prepare food. Even Father Francisco, who came once a month to celebrate Mass in the village, agreed to perform the ceremony on a November Saturday. During the preparation weeks, Francisca and Sebastião lived a kind of late courtship. They walked together through neighboring properties, visiting acquaintances who wanted to better know her future husband. They talked for hours about future plans, about how to combine the 2 properties, about Pedro's upbringing. One afternoon they were sitting under the mango tree, where Joaquin had buried the gold, planning where to build a larger chicken coop, when Francisca asked a question that had been circling her mind. Sebastião, do you want to have children of your own? He stopped drawing plants in the dirt and looked at her. I do, but it's not a condition for our happiness. If God blesses us with children, I'll be grateful. If not, Pedro will be enough to fill my heart. And if I can't? The question came loaded with old insecurity. If my body isn't capable? Sebastião moved closer to her and took her hands. Francisca, you give me peace. You give me purpose. You give me a family in Pedro. You've already given me more than I imagined I'd have again in life. Everything else would be an extra gift. His words calmed fears she didn't even know she carried. Fears about her ability to be a wife again. about her skill at loving fully once more, about deserving a second chance at happiness. 5 days before the wedding, news arrived that stirred the entire settlement. A merchant from the capital brought information about major political changes in the country. "The emperor has fallen," he announced in the central plaza. "They've proclaimed the republic. Dom Pedro II has been overthrown by the military." The news caused uproar. Some worried about changes that might come. Others celebrated the end of the monarchy. Most, accustomed to the constant difficulties of certain life, received the information with the resignation of those who knew that regardless of who governed, life would continue being hard and demanding work. Manuel, who had fought in the Paraguay War defending the empire, shook his head sadly. "I served that emperor," he told Sebastião. "Now even he has no place in this country. Times change too quickly, my young man." "Sometimes change," replied Sebastião, looking at Francisca feeding chickens in the yard. "Others remain the same. Love remains the same." Manuel followed Sebastião's gaze and smiled. "You're right. The emperor may fall, the republic may come. Everything that can change may change. But a man loving a woman, starting a family, working to support it, that never changes." "Exactly." That night, Francisca was particularly thoughtful. The political changes had awakened in her a sense that the entire world was transforming, that old certainties were crumbling to make way for the unknown. "Are you worried about the news?" asked Sebastião, noticing her quietness. "No," she replied after thinking. "I'm thinking it's appropriate. The country is beginning a new era. We're also beginning a new era. It seems everything is changing at the same time. And is that good?" Francisca looked around the house she would soon leave, looked at Pedro sleeping peacefully, looked at Sebastião watching her with affection. "It's good," she said finally. "Change is frightening, but sometimes it's the only way to grow." And with that reflection, she knew she was ready for marriage, ready for change, ready to write a new chapter in her story. In 5 days, she would be a married woman again. In 5 days, she would truly begin her new life. The dawn of November 23, 1889, brought with it a fresh breeze that relieved the Sertão's usual heat. Francisca woke in the house that had been hers for 3 years, knowing that when the sun set, she would be sleeping in a different bed, in a different house, as a different woman. Pedro had spent the night at Manuel's house, so she could prepare calmly. The house's solitude, which once oppressed her, now felt like a farewell embrace. Each corner held memories of Joaquin, of her widowed life, of her slow reconstruction. Doña Quiteria arrived with the sun, bringing field flowers for her hair arrangement and rose-scented soap for the bride's bath. "How do you feel, girl?" asked the old woman while heating water for the bath. "Scared," replied Francisca honestly, "and happy, and guilty for being happy, and afraid of not knowing how to be a wife again." "All normal," said Doña Quiteria philosophically. "Marrying for the second time is more complicated than marrying for the first. The first time one is ignorant. The second time one knows too much." Francisca laughed at the accurate observation. The bath was a purifying ritual. Doña Quiteria had brought rose petals and fragrant herbs that floated in the warm water like small blessings. While washing, Francisca tried to push away nerves and concentrate on gratitude. Gratitude for surviving widowhood, gratitude for finding love again, gratitude that Pedro had accepted Sebastião so easily, gratitude for the second chance not everyone receives in life. The blue dress had turned out perfect. Francisca had worked on it for weeks, embroidering small flowers on the skirt, adjusting every detail with the care of someone who knows some pieces of clothing mark unique moments in life. When she looked in the dresser's small mirror, she saw a woman different from the young and inexperienced bride she had been 7 years before. She saw a woman who knew pain and joy, loss and renewal, a woman who had chosen love consciously, not from romantic impulse, but from mature decision. The procession to the ranch was small but warm. Manuel had lent his cart, decorated with ribbons and flowers. Pedro, dressed in new clothes Sebastião had ordered made, couldn't contain his pride at walking in front, carrying the rings on an embroidered little pillow. The Boa Esperança ranch was unrecognizable. Sebastião had worked for weeks to transform it into a party setting. Colorful little flags adorned the trees. Tables were arranged in the spacious yard, and on the veranda, decorated with wildflowers, Father Francisco waited with his ceremonial vestments. When Francisca got down from the cart, Sebastião was waiting at the gate. He wore dark clothes, simple but elegant, and his eyes shone in a way that made her momentarily forget all nervousness. "You look beautiful," he said. offering her his arm. "You look handsome too," she replied, accepting the support. They walked together to the veranda, where the few guests, neighbors, settlement friends, ranch workers, waited in respectful silence. It was a small but warm assembly, formed by people who knew their stories and sincerely wished their happiness. Father Francisco, a kind man with white hair, opened the ceremony with words that went straight to the heart. "Dear brothers, we are here to celebrate not only the union of Sebastião and Francisca, but proof that God allows second beginnings to those who keep their hearts open to hope." Francisca felt tears prick her eyes. The priest had understood exactly what that wedding represented. The vows were simple and true. Sebastião promised to love Francisca and Pedro as family, protect them with his life, and build with her a home based on respect and affection. Francisca promised to share with Sebastião her joys and sorrows, support him in difficult moments, and honor the love they had found in each other. When they exchanged rings, simple gold bands Sebastião had ordered made in town, Pedro applauded spontaneously, drawing laughter from the small audience. "I pronounce you husband and wife," announced the priest. "Sebastião, you may kiss the bride." The kiss was chaste, appropriate for the public setting, but charged with intimate promises. When they separated, Francisca saw in Sebastião's eyes a reflection of her own feelings, relief, joy, and the sensation of having finally reached safe harbor. The celebration was joyful, but simple. The women had prepared delicious dishes with ingredients the season allowed. Musicians played forró and waltz, and even the oldest were encouraged to dance. Francisca danced with Sebastião under the stars, in the yard of what was now her house. It was a strange and wonderful sensation to be there, in that space that had belonged to Isabel, but now opened to receive her as the new mistress. "How does it feel to be Señora Ferreira?" asked Sebastião during the dance. "Different," she admitted, "but good different." When the party ended and guests left, only the three of them remained: Sebastião, Francisca, and Pedro, who had fallen asleep on the veranda during the music. Sebastião carried the boy to the room he had prepared especially for him, decorated with the wooden horses they had made together. Francisca followed them, watching the delicacy with which Sebastião settled Pedro in the new bed. "Good night, son," whispered Sebastião, and the word son came naturally, effortlessly. In the hallway before the main bedroom door, they paused, charged with expectation and nervousness. Both knew this would be the moment of truth, when they would stop being two widows consoling each other and become husband and wife, in fact. "Francisca," said Sebastião softly, "we're not in a hurry for anything. We can go slowly, at whatever pace you need." She looked at him, at this man who had arrived in her life like a storm and revealed himself to be a calm. She thought of Joaquin, who had blessed this union through his letter. She thought of Isabel, whose presence still inhabited that house, but not threateningly. "Sebastião," she said, touching his face with delicacy, "I want to be your wife, completely." And when they entered the room together, Francisca knew she had finally found her place in the world again. Outside, the Sertão night covered the Boa Esperança ranch with its blanket of stars, blessing the beginning of a new family. The first months of marriage were a delicate dance of adaptation. Francisca got used to the different sounds of the large ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the noise of workers beginning activities before dawn, the echo of her own steps in the wide corridors. The house had gained life again. Pedro ran through the rooms bringing laughter and childish noise. Francisca had reorganized the kitchen her way, planted aromatic herbs in the window, spread her sewing work around cozy corners. Isabel's portrait had remained in its place in the main room, but now shared space with small personal objects of Francisca's, a vase with dried flowers, pillows embroidered by her hands, the sewing machine Sebastião had bought for her in town. It was strange and comforting at the same time, two love stories coexisting in the same space, respecting each other mutually, creating a new narrative that honored the past without being trapped in it. Pedro flourished in ranch life. Sebastião taught him about animals, let him accompany the cowboys' activities, explained about planting and land care. The boy had gained a gentle pony and spent hours riding around the yard under his stepfather's watchful eye. "Uncle Bastião," said Pedro one afternoon while helping feed the pigs, "can I call you father?" Sebastião stopped what he was doing and knelt at the boy's eye level. "I would very much like you to," he replied, moved. "But remember, you already have a father, right? The Father who's in heaven." "I know," said Pedro seriously, "but I thought I could have a father in heaven and a father here on earth. Aunt Chica said I could." "Your aunt, your mother," Sebastião corrected himself. is right. You can have as many fathers as you need. So can I call you father? Yes, my son. From that day on, Pedro began referring to Sebastião as father, a word that sounded like music in the ears of the man who had given up on being a father when he lost Isabel and the baby. Francisca watched these interactions with a warmed heart. Seeing Pedro so happy and secure validated her decision to remarry. The child needed a father figure, and Sebastião had proven to be a natural father, patient and loving. The ranch workers themselves noticed the transformation in Sebastião. José, the oldest foreman, commented to Francisca, "Doña Francisca, the boss became another man after you arrived. Before he was good but sad. Now he's good and happy. It makes a difference in everyone's work." It was true. Sebastião had recovered an energy that Francisca suspected had been dormant since Isabel's death. He made long-term plans for the ranch, invested in improvements, treated employees with more closeness. One March afternoon, while Francisca sewed on the veranda and watched Pedro play with puppies, Sebastião approached with a strange expression on his face. "What happened?" she asked, noticing his expression. "I received a letter from town," he said, sitting beside her. "About Joaquin's debt." Francisca's heart accelerated. It had been months since she thought about the dangerous creditors who had tormented her first husband's last days. "What does the letter say?" "Colonel Batista died. Heart attack. With his death, the businesses dissolved and debts were cancelled." Sebastião took her hand. "You are officially free from that problem." Francisca closed her eyes, feeling a weight she had carried for years finally leaving her shoulders. It was as if Joaquin had finally found peace too. "It means we can live without fear," she said. "We always could, but now we're certain of it." That night, they made love with a new freedom. There were no more shadows from the past hovering over them, no more secrets or fears. It was just a man and woman who had chosen to build a life together and were finally free to do so fully. In May came a surprise that altered the family dynamic again. Francisca was 2 weeks late and had begun feeling morning sickness she recognized immediately. "Sebastião," she said one morning after Pedro went out to play in the yard, "I think I'm expecting a baby." Sebastião stopped with his coffee cup halfway to his lips. "Are you sure?" "Almost sure. All the signs are here." Sebastião put down the cup, came to her, and enveloped her in a careful embrace, as if she were made of crystal. "How do you feel?" he asked. His voice choked with emotion. "Scared," she admitted. "Happy, worried, grateful, all at the same time." "And how do I feel?" Sebastião laughed, a sound full of joy. "I feel as if God decided to give us more blessings than we deserve." The pregnancy was confirmed by Doña Quiteria, who was called to examine Francisca. The old midwife smiled, satisfied with the diagnosis. "Girl, you are indeed expecting, and from what I see, it will be a calm pregnancy. Your body knows what to do." The news spread quickly through the community. Manuel was among the first to come congratulate the couple. "So the family is going to grow?" he said with a wide smile. "How good! This ranch was needing the sound of children running around the corners." Pedro received the news that he would be a big brother with typical childish enthusiasm. "I'm going to teach the baby to ride horses," he announced, "and to make clay figures." "First it needs to be born," laughed Francisca, "and grow a little." "He or she," corrected Sebastião. "It could be a girl too." "Doesn't matter," said Pedro generously. "I'll love it the same." As the pregnancy progressed, Francisca felt completely integrated into her new life. The Boa Esperanza ranch was her home now, not just the place where she lived. Sebastião was her real husband, not just a convenient companion. Pedro was her heart's son, and the baby growing in her womb was the living symbol that sometimes life offers more second chances than we expect. One night, lying beside Sebastião and feeling the baby's first movements, Francisca made a reflection aloud. "Do you know what I find most impressive about all this?" "What?" "How love can grow. I thought that after Joaquin, if I ever loved again, it would be a smaller, more cautious love. But it's not like that. My love for you doesn't diminish what I felt for him. It's a different love, but not smaller." Sebastião kissed her forehead softly. "Isabel taught me to love. You taught me to love again. They're different lessons, but equally precious. And now we're going to teach our children to love." "Our children," repeated Sebastião, savoring the word. "Pedro and the baby. Our family." Francisca placed her hand on her belly that was beginning to show and smiled in the darkness. She had found not just a new love, but a new version of herself, a version that believed in new beginnings. December arrived loaded with omens. Rain had returned earlier than in previous years, bringing relief to the dry earth and hope for the plantations. Francisca, now 6 months pregnant, felt full watching her rounded belly and imagining what it would be like to hold the child in her arms. Pedro had become an exemplary big brother before the baby was even born. He talked to Francisca's belly every night, telling about his day, promising to teach everything he knew to the brother or sister who was coming. It was on one of those nights, while Pedro talked with the baby, that something unexpected happened. Sebastião arrived from town with a somber expression and an envelope in his hands. "What's wrong?" asked Francisca, noticing his tension. "A letter from the town notary, about Joaquín's inheritance." Francisca frowned. Joaquín hadn't left a formal inheritance. There were only the few personal belongings and the gold buried in the yard, which she had already recovered. "What inheritance?" Sebastião hesitated, as if the words were too heavy to be pronounced. "It seems Joaquín was heir to lands in Minas Gerais. An uncle of his, whom we never knew, died and left a considerable property to him. Since Joaquín also died, the inheritance passes to you." Francisca sat heavily in the veranda chair. Joaquín had never mentioned relatives in Minas, much less uncles with properties. How is this possible? Joaquín always said he had no family. Apparently there was family he didn't know about, or chose not to mention. Sebastião handed her the official letter. "The notary needs your presence to formalize the transfer." Francisca read the letter twice, trying to process the information. According to the document, Joaquín was the legitimate heir to a coffee plantation in Minas Gerais, valued at an amount that represented more money than she had seen in her entire life. "Sebastião, this changes everything," she whispered. "How so?" "That amount, it's enough to buy several ranches like ours, enough to give Pedro and the coming baby a completely different life." Sebastião sat beside her, but there was something strange in his expression. "Francisca, I need to tell you something. Something I've kept until now because I didn't know how to explain." Her heart accelerated. She had learned to recognize that tone of voice. It was the tone Sebastião used when he was about to reveal something important and potentially disturbing. "What is it?" "I knew about this inheritance." The words fell between them like lightning in a clear sky. Francisca looked at him, trying to understand what she was hearing. "How do you mean you knew?" "Joaquín told me. In the conversations we had in his last months of life, he knew about the existence of this uncle, knew about the possibility of the inheritance, but never wanted to seek out the family because he was ashamed of his smuggler life." Francisca stood up abruptly, the letter falling to the floor. "And why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because I wasn't certain the inheritance would materialize. Because I thought it would be better for you to discover naturally through official channels." "Sebastião, this is huge. You hid from me that my husband was heir to a fortune." Sebastião also stood up, trying to approach her, but Francisca stepped back. "Francisca, listen." "No!" Her voice came out louder than intended, making Pedro appear at the door, worried. "Go play inside, Pedro," she said more gently. "The adults need to talk." When Pedro disappeared, she turned to Sebastião with eyes shining with tears. "You lied to me. During all these months of marriage, you hid something fundamental about my life." "I didn't lie. I just didn't tell everything at once." "It's the same thing." Francisca began pacing back and forth on the veranda, her hands on her belly in instinctive protection of the baby. "How can I trust you after this? What other things are you hiding from me?" "Nothing more, I swear. Francisca, please." "Why did you do this, Sebastião? Why did you hide it?" Sebastião ran his hands through his hair, clearly struggling with how to explain. "Because I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Afraid that if you knew you were rich, you wouldn't need me anymore." The honest confession paused Francisca's fury for a moment. She looked at him, seeing real vulnerability in his eyes. "You thought I married you out of necessity?" "No, but deep down I was always afraid that that you accepted marrying me because you needed protection, financial security. If you knew you had your own money, maybe what? Maybe you'd realize you didn't need to settle for a lonely widower from the Sertão." Francisca stopped walking and looked at him for a long moment. The anger was still there, but began mixing with painful understanding. "Sebastião, do you really believe I married you for convenience?" "No, at least not rationally. But fear speaks louder than reason sometimes." Francisca sat down again, feeling the weight of the revelation on all aspects of her life. The inheritance changed everything. Her possibilities, her choices, her future. "How long were you going to wait to tell me?" "I don't know. Maybe I would never tell if the inheritance didn't materialize officially. And if it did materialize, then I would tell after you received the official letter, like what happened." Francisca closed her eyes, trying to organize her thoughts. She was pregnant, married for just a few months, and now had discovered she was heir to a fortune she didn't know existed. Besides, discovering her husband had hidden this from her. "I need time to think," she said finally. "Francisca." "No." "Sebastião." "I need time alone." Sebastião nodded reluctantly. "I'll sleep in the guest room tonight." "Thank you." After he left, Francisca remained alone on the veranda, watching the stars and trying to understand how her life had become complicated again, just when it finally seemed she had found peace. The inheritance changed everything. With that money, she could live wherever she wanted, raise Pedro and the baby anywhere, even in the capital. She wouldn't need Sebastião's protection anymore, wouldn't need anyone anymore. But the question that tormented her was, if she didn't need Sebastião, would she still want him? The answer to that question would define the rest of her life. Francisca didn't sleep that night. She stayed in the rocking chair on the veranda until dawn, watching the stars give way to the rising sun and trying to untangle the skein of feelings that the inheritance discovery had created. Pedro found her there when he woke up, worried about her absence from bed. "Mama, why are you out here?" he asked, using the word mama for the first time to refer to her. The word touched her heart in an unexpected way. Pedro had begun calling her that naturally, without ceremony, and now it sounded like an anchor in the middle of the emotional storm she was living. "I was thinking, my love," she replied, pulling him into her lap. "Sometimes adults need to think a lot about things, about bad things, about complicated things." Pedro rested his head on her shoulder, and Francisca felt sudden clarity cross her mind. There was her answer, not in the inheritance, not in Sebastião's fears, not in the infinite possibilities money opened. There, in the boy who called her mama, in the baby growing in her womb, in the simple but true life they had built together. Sebastião appeared at the kitchen door, hesitant, clearly having not slept either. "Good morning," he said cautiously. "Good morning," she replied. "Pedro, go have your breakfast. I need to talk to your father." Pedro obeyed, and they were alone again. "I made a decision," said Francisca without preamble. Sebastião prepared for the worst. She could see in the tension of his shoulders. "I'm going to accept the inheritance. I'll go to the notary to formalize the transfer. And then I'm going to sell the lands." Sebastião blinked, surprised. "Sell? I have no desire to be a coffee plantation owner in Minas Gerais. I have no interest in becoming a rich lady from the capital." Francisca stood up and walked toward him. "I want to use the money to improve our life here. Expand the ranch, invest in more cattle, guarantee Pedro and the baby have education, maybe build a school in the settlement." "Our life?" Sebastião's voice came out choked with emotion. "You don't want to leave?" Francisca held his face between her hands. "Sebastião, you lied to me. You hid something important because you were afraid of losing me. It was wrong, and I'm not going to pretend I wasn't hurt." He nodded, taking responsibility. "But do you know what I discovered tonight thinking about all this?" "What?" "I discovered you were right to be afraid. Not afraid that I didn't love you, that fear was silly, but afraid that I would leave if I had other options." Sebastião frowned, not understanding. "How so?" "Because I myself had that fear all night. I thought, now that I have money, I can leave. I can give Pedro an education in the big city. I can do everything alone." Francisca smiled through tears. "And do you know what I felt when I imagined that?" "What?" "Terror. Absolute terror. Because I realized I don't want to do anything alone anymore. I don't want to raise Pedro alone. I don't want to have this baby alone. I don't want to be rich alone. I want to share all of this with you." Sebastião enveloped her in a careful embrace, mindful of her pregnancy. "Are you sure? With all that money you can have any life you want." "I already have the life I want," she said against his chest. "I have a husband who loves me so much he's afraid of losing me. I have a son who calls me mama. I have another baby coming. I have a house that became a home. Why would I want another life?" Sebastião kissed her then, a kiss wet with tears, his and hers. "Forgive me for hiding about the inheritance," he said. "I won't do it again. And I forgive you for being afraid," she replied. "But promise you won't make decisions for me again. If we have fears, we share them. If we have secrets, we share them. If we have money," she laughed, "we invest together. I promise." The following months were of great movement. Francisca traveled to the notary in Minas, accompanied by Sebastião, to formalize the inheritance and put the lands up for sale. The process was faster than they expected. There were interested buyers, and the property was sold for an amount even higher than initially estimated. With the money, They did exactly what Francisca had planned. They expanded the ranch, bought more cattle, hired more workers. Sebastião invested in new technology to increase productivity, and Francisca began plans for a small school in the settlement. Pedro grew strong and happy, completely adapted to life as a rancher's son. He had gained responsibilities appropriate for his age and took pride in helping with family business. In March 1890, Maria Isabel was born, the name chosen to honor both Pedro's mother and Sebastião's first wife. The birth was calm, assisted by Doña Quiteria, and the girl came into the world crying loudly, as if announcing her victorious arrival. Sebastião cried when he held his daughter for the first time. After so many years believing he wouldn't be a father again, there was living proof that life still had good surprises stored for him. Pedro was an exemplary big brother, insisting on helping with all the baby's care and promising to teach her everything about horses as soon as she was old enough. One April afternoon, while Francisca nursed Maria Isabel on the veranda and watched Pedro play in the yard with the dogs, Manuel appeared for one of his regular visits. "How's the settlement's most prosperous family doing?" he asked with his usual ironic smile. "We're doing well, Manet. Very well. And you should be. I've never seen a greater transformation than this ranch's. Sebastião became another man, you became another woman. Pedro became a confident child, and now you have this little princess to complete the picture." Francisca smiled, adjusting her daughter in her arms. "Do you know what I discovered, Manet?" "What?" "That happiness isn't in not having problems. It's in having problems worth solving with the people we love." Manuel nodded his head, approving the philosophy. "Wise woman. Joaquin, up there, must be proud to see he chose well the person to care for his family. And Isabel too," added Francisca, looking toward the house door. "I think she would approve of what we did with her ranch." "Of course she would approve. A house needs life, not eternal mourning." When Manuel left, Francisca remained alone with Maria Isabel, gently rocking in the chair and watching the ranch's movement. The workers finished the day's activities. Pedro helped Sebastião fix a nearby fence. Life followed its calm and productive rhythm. It was exactly what she had dreamed of in the most difficult times of widowhood, when she thought she would never be truly happy again. A family, a purpose, a future built on solid foundations of love and mutual respect. Sebastião approached at sunset, dirty with earth but satisfied with the day's work. "How are my two girls?" he asked, kissing first Francisca, then Maria Isabel's little head. "We're well. We're home." "Home," he repeated, savoring the word. "Sebastião?" "Yes?" "Thank you." "For what?" "For keeping your promise to Joaquin, for taking care of us, for giving me back the ability to be happy." "Francisca, I'm the one who should thank you. You gave me back my life." They sat together on the veranda, watching Pedro play, while Maria Isabel slept in her mother's arms. The peace that enveloped them in that moment was palpable, built on dried tears, overcome fears, and conscious love. "Do you know what I think Joaquin would say if he were here?" asked Francisca. "What?" "Eat and stay. Stay forever." Sebastião laughed, remembering the first words she had said to him that distant morning when he had appeared hungry at her door. "And that's what I intend to do," he said. "Stay forever." Francisca smiled, nestling into her husband's shoulder while watching the first stars appear in the Sertão sky. She had found not just a new love, but a new version of herself. A version that believed in new beginnings, that knew how to build happiness on the ashes of pain, that understood that true love doesn't replace past loves, it honors them while creating something new and precious. Life in Arraial da Serra would continue with its cycles of rain and drought, planting and harvest, births and deaths. But the Boa Esperança Ranch had become what its name promised, a place of renewed hope, where two people who had lost much discovered there was still much to gain. And while the stars witnessed another night of peace in that reconstituted family, Francisca whispered a prayer of gratitude to the heavens, knowing she had finally found her place in the world, a place where the past was honored, the present was lived fully, and the future opened like a fertile field full of possibilities.